She signed the papers with trembling hands, tears falling on the ink that ended everything. 6 years later, he sees a little boy with his same eyes, and suddenly, every lie, every goodbye, comes crashing back. What happens when the man who once broke her heart realizes he's been missing his own child? Before we dive into today's story, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? The city was a living storm of ambition, where people chased dreams faster than they could breathe, and power had a face, a name, and a sharp gray suit. That face belonged to Alexander Knight, the 32-year-old millionaire whose name alone could silence a room. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words cut through the air like glass, polished, cold, and always final. His empire towered above the skyline, his office perched high above the noise of ordinary lives, as if even gravity dared not pull him down. He believed love was a weakness, empathy a disease, and that emotions were the chains that kept lesser men from greatness. To him, people were tools, useful until they broke, and then easily replaced. Every morning, his employees rehearsed their courage before stepping through his glass doors. They spoke softly, walked quickly, and never looked him in the eyes for too long. Rumor said he fired a man once for sneezing during a meeting. No one knew if it was true, but everyone believed it. To work under Alexander was to live inside a machine where perfection was law and mistakes were sin. That morning, the elevator opened with a whisper, and a young woman stepped out, clutching a folder to her chest. Maya Lewis. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she took in the silver, sterile beauty of the office around her. The receptionist gave her a sympathetic look, the kind reserved for someone walking into a lion's den. "You're the new secretary?" the woman asked. Maya nodded, forcing a small smile that carried more courage than confidence. When she entered Alexander Knight's office, time seemed to still. He didn't look up from his desk at first, his attention fixed on the lines of a financial report that would decide whether a company lived or died. "Sit," he said without emotion, his tone flat, practiced, commanding. Maya sat, her hands trembled slightly, though her voice didn't betray it when she introduced herself. "Good morning, Mr. Knight. I'm Maya Lewis, your new executive assistant." He finally looked up. The moment their eyes met, it was like two worlds collided, one made of steel, the other of quiet warmth. Alexander's gaze lingered a second too long, and though he quickly masked it, something shifted in the air. "You're early," he said. "That's rare." Maya smiled softly. "I believe being early is a form of respect. Respect is earned, not scheduled," he replied, turning his eyes back to the screen. His tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, but something about her calm response unsettled him. She moved around the office quietly, organizing files, learning the rhythm of the man behind the legend. Every motion of hers was graceful, deliberate. She didn't rush, she didn't stumble, she didn't fear him. It was that steadiness, that quiet composure, that began to chip away at the wall he'd built between himself and the world. He noticed her perfume one afternoon, something light and floral, not demanding attention, just existing. He noticed the way she greeted the janitor with the same kindness she offered the executives. It irritated him at first, then it intrigued him. For the first time in years, Alexander found himself distracted during meetings, wondering what she might be thinking as she scribbled notes beside him. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was something unfamiliar, something dangerously human. But he didn't like that, not one bit. By noon, the building buzzed with its usual fear and precision. Phones rang like sirens, heels struck the floor like war drums, and somewhere above it all, Alexander Knight sat motionless behind his desk, watching the rain streak down the tall glass windows. He told himself he was reviewing quarterly reports, but his eyes hadn't moved in minutes. His thoughts, inconvenient, intrusive, and dangerously soft, kept circling back to the same image. Maya Lewis standing by the filing cabinet that morning, hair brushing her shoulder, humming. Under her breath like the world outside didn't exist. He hated it. That sound, that peace. He hated how her voice lingered even when she wasn't speaking. For a man who thrived on control, this felt like slipping on ice. Every time she smiled, it felt as though the temperature in the room rose just enough to melt something frozen inside him, and that terrified him more than failure ever could. Around 3 in the afternoon, a meeting with board investors began. Maya entered quietly, setting folders in front of each man around the table. They barely looked at her, but Alexander did. He caught himself watching the careful way she moved, how she made even routine gestures graceful. He forced his gaze back to the screen, annoyed at his own distraction. During her presentation notes, her soft voice filled the room, confident but gentle, respectful yet assured. The investors nodded approvingly. Alexander noticed that too. For a moment, pride flashed in his chest, not pride for himself, but for her. Then, almost as quickly, he buried it beneath irritation. When the meeting ended, the room emptied. Only Maya lingered, collecting stray papers. Alexander stood at the window, city lights beginning to flicker below like 1,000 tiny hearts. He spoke without turning. "You did well today." She looked up, surprised by the rare compliment. "Thank you, sir." "I didn't ask for gratitude," he replied sharply, but the edge in his voice lacked its usual bite. It was habit, not hostility. He turned to find her watching him quietly, eyes calm and steady. "You don't have to act afraid," she said softly. "I'm not one of them." He frowned. "One of who?" "The people who see you as something more than human," she said, gathering the papers. "Everyone here walks like they're in a temple, but you're just a man, Mr. Knight. Powerful, yes, but still a man." Her words landed heavier than she intended. For a heartbeat, he forgot to breathe. Just a man. No one had said that to him in years. It sounded almost merciful. When she left the room, her scent lingered in the air. Light, fleeting, haunting. Alexander stood alone for a long time, fingers pressed to his lips as if trying to remember how it felt to smile. That evening, he told himself he wouldn't think about her again. But when midnight came and the city lights dimmed, he was still awake, replaying her words in the silence. And somewhere deep inside that cold, calculating heart, the first tiny crack appeared. Alexander Knight, the man who believed love was a weakness, had just felt something he couldn't define, and it scared him more than anything he'd ever conquered. The storm outside mirrored the one in his head, fierce and relentless. Wind rattled the glass walls of the 37th floor office, lightning slicing through the skyline of New York like a flash of white fire. The building had long emptied. The echo of heels, the murmur of phones, the hum of conversation, all gone. All except her. Maya Lewis. She sat at her desk, the soft glow of her computer screen painting her skin in golden light. Her curls brushed her shoulders as she typed, lips pursed in quiet focus. Alexander Hale watched from his office doorway, silently, unwilling to admit even to himself that he had been watching for more than a few seconds. The woman fascinated him in ways he couldn't explain. Her calmness, her soft laughter in a place that thrived on fear, her refusal to shrink beneath the weight of his reputation. She didn't belong in his world, and yet she lit it up. He told himself he stayed because of work, the quarterly reports, the client list. The excuses were endless. But when he heard the gentle clink of her coffee cup as she rose from her desk and walked toward his office, he knew it wasn't the reports that held him there. It was her. "Sir, I finished the presentation for tomorrow's meeting," she said, stepping inside with quiet confidence. Her voice had that calm steadiness that made him look up from his screen every time. "Leave it on the desk," he said, not daring to meet her gaze. She nodded, walking closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The scent of coffee and vanilla followed her, wrapping around him like a spell. She leaned forward to place the file in front of him, and that was when it happened. Her hand trembled. The mug she carried slipped. In an instant, the dark liquid splashed across his crisp white shirt, spreading warmth and chaos at once. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, panic flooding her face. "Sir, I didn't mean—" But before she could finish, she was already moving, grabbing tissues from his desk, leaning in to dab the stain. Her movements were frantic, desperate, her breath uneven. Alexander should have shouted. That was what everyone expected from him, the cold, ruthless CEO who never tolerated mistakes. But the words never came. Because when she leaned closer, when her trembling fingers brushed his chest, something inside him went still. The scent of her hair, fresh and floral. The warmth of her touch, soft but electric. The nearness of her face. Too close, too human. Maya, he murmured, his voice rougher than he intended. She froze. The sound of her name in his tone seemed to hang in the air between them. Slowly she lifted her gaze, and when their eyes met, the world outside, the thunder, the rain, the city, disappeared. He saw everything he shouldn't have in her eyes: gentleness, strength, confusion, the kind of emotion he had spent his life avoiding. His jaw tightened, his pulse thudding in his throat. I... I'll get you a clean shirt, she stammered, stepping back, her voice barely above a whisper. But Alexander couldn't move. He watched her turn away, the soft sway of her silhouette framed against the storm outside. He had spent years mastering control of his company, of his eyes, mage, of himself. But tonight, one woman's accidental touch had undone all of it. He slipped off the ruined shirt and tossed it aside, trying to calm the racing in his chest. What the hell was that, he thought? She was an employee, temporary, replaceable. And yet his thoughts refused to obey logic. Every breath still carried her scent. Every heartbeat still echoed her name. In the next room, Maya pressed her palms against the sink, breathing hard. Her reflection in the mirror stared back at her, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. She shouldn't have touched him. She knew what kind of man Alexander Hale was: heartless, demanding, impossible to please. The kind of man who could destroy someone's confidence with a single glance. And yet, tonight, when he said her name, something inside her had melted. She rinsed her hands, trying to steady herself. It was just an accident, she told her reflection. You spilled coffee, that's all. But her heart didn't believe it. When she returned with a clean shirt, she found him standing by the window, shirtless, the city lights casting shadows along the planes of his chest. The sight startled her, not because he was handsome, but because he looked human, tired, lonely. He turned to her. You can leave it there, he said quietly. Her throat went dry. Of course, sir. She placed the shirt on the chair and turned to leave, but something stopped her, a pull she couldn't explain. Alexander's eyes followed her, and for the first time in years, he felt a question rise he didn't know how to answer. Why does it feel like she's the only real thing in this room? The rain outside hit harder. The clock ticked softly. Neither of them spoke. And yet, in that silence, something shifted. Something neither could name. Something dangerous and magnetic and utterly forbidden. As she reached the door, her hand hesitated on the handle, and when she finally looked back, his gaze was waiting. Unflinching. Intense. The kind of look that warned her she'd just stepped into something she could never walk away from. The storm had passed, but its echo remained. Somewhere between them, quiet, unseen, waiting. The next few days unfolded with a strange rhythm neither of them could name. To everyone else, the Hale Corporation looked the same: polished glass, sharp suits, and a CEO whose presence turned silence into reverence. But under the surface, something had changed. Alexander Hale, the man who built an empire from pure discipline, found himself distracted. The world that once obeyed his commands, numbers, meetings, contracts, now seemed to fade the moment Maya Lewis walked into a room. Her laughter, soft but unafraid, broke through the cold marble of his office. Her smile lingered longer in his mind than any signature on paper. He told himself it was irritation, that she was getting under his skin because she wasn't intimidated by him like everyone else. But deep down, he knew it was something far more dangerous. Maya sensed it too. The air between them carried a tension so thick it almost hummed. Every time she entered his office to deliver files, her pulse quickened. Every time their eyes met, something unspoken flickered and vanished just as quickly. It was terrifying and addictive. He began staying late. At first, he justified it with work, the new partnership deal. the expansion in London. But she noticed the pattern, how he'd find a reason for her to stay, assigning last-minute projects just before everyone else clocked out. Maya, I need these reports summarized before morning, he'd say, voice cool, eyes unreadable. But when she looked up, she often caught him watching her. Not like a boss, not like a man in control, but like someone trying to remember how to breathe. She'd nod, hiding the tremor in her voice. Of course, sir. The office after hours became its own world. The hum of the city below faded, leaving only the rhythm of rain against the glass and the quiet shuffle of papers. Sometimes he'd walk to the window, one hand in his pocket, pretending to study the skyline while really studying her reflection in the glass. She worked with quiet grace. The movement of her pen, the tilt of her head, the way she bit her lower lip when thinking. He hated how much he noticed. Once, around midnight, she stood to stretch and caught him looking. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The air thickened between them, too heavy with what they wouldn't say. Maya quickly looked down, pretending to straighten a stack of papers. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't know why her heart betrayed her every time he was near. Alexander, frustrated, tore his gaze away. He had built his empire by never yielding, not to emotion, not to weakness. Love was chaos, and chaos destroyed men like him. But the more he tried to distance himself, the more the universe seemed to conspire against his will. By Thursday, his patience was thin. He caught himself checking the clock before she arrived, his chest tightening with anticipation he refused to acknowledge. He even started wearing lighter cologne, something he hadn't done in years, without realizing who he was trying to impress. Maya, meanwhile, battled her own storm. She told herself it was nothing, admiration, perhaps, or curiosity. But the memory of that night, his gaze, his voice saying her name, wouldn't leave her. It followed her into dreams, into the soft hum of her morning coffee, into the silence of her tiny apartment. Friday evening arrived like a secret. The rest of the staff had gone home early, leaving the office in twilight. Only one lamp glowed on her desk, casting soft golden light across her skin. She sat in silence, reviewing a document, when he appeared in her doorway. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice low. She smiled faintly. "You asked for the figures by tonight." He leaned against the doorframe, dying her. "You didn't have to take me so literally." Her heart skipped. "Then why did you stay, sir?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as if crossing a line he'd been drawing for days. His footsteps echoed in the quiet. When he reached her desk, she looked up, and time stalled. They both reached for the same file, his hand brushing hers. The contact was brief, but searing. Her breath hitched, his fingers froze. The touch sent a shiver straight through both of them, awakening something that had been waiting in the dark corners of their hearts. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved. Their eyes met, hers wide with confusion, his dark with conflict. The silence between them felt alive. Alexander's throat tightened. He should have stepped back, said something cold, something professional. But words refused to come. The world outside ceased to exist. It was just her, the warmth of her skin, the flutter of her pulse, the scent of her perfume, the echo of his name unsaid on her lips. Maya didn't know whether to move or breathe. The air crackled with unspoken things, desire, fear, curiosity, all blending into something that made her heart ache. His hand lingered a second too long, and then, as if waking from a dream, he pulled away sharply, the file slipping from their hands and scattering papers across the floor. Maya flinched, bending to pick them up, her fingers trembling. He turned his back, eyes squeezed shut, trying to steady the chaos inside him. "Don't," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. She paused, looking up. "Sir?" He didn't turn. "Don't stay too late next time." His voice was strained, rough, as if the words cost him something. Maya gathered the papers, her chest tight. She wanted to ask what he meant, but fear, or maybe something else, held her still. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and watched his silhouette against the city lights. The man who once seemed unbreakable now looked haunted. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but stopped herself. Instead, she whispered, softly, "Good night, Mr. Hale." He didn't answer, only closed his eyes at the sound of her voice. She turned, walked to the door, her heels echoing like the final beats of a heart trying to stay calm. Every step away from him felt heavier than it should have. When she reached the elevator, she heard his voice, faint, almost lost to the hum of the city. "Don't fall for her," he whispered to himself. But what neither of them knew was that deep down, it was already far too late. The city pulsed beneath them, its veins lit by 1,000 restless lights. It was late again, too late for anyone decent to still be working. Yet in the corner office, time had stopped belonging to the clock. The building was silent, emptied of all sound except the faint hum of electricity and the soft tapping of Maya's keyboard. She was typing by the faint glow of her monitor, her face illuminated in gold and blue. Outside, rain had started again, thin, whispering streaks against the window, painting everything with melancholy. Alexander Hale stood by the window, arms crossed, pretending to read a document, but really listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Every small sound she made seemed amplified in the stillness. Every sigh, every breath, every movement. He had tried, God, he had tried, to keep his distance. But something inside him had already shifted, and no logic or discipline could bring it back to the cold world he used to live in. His mind kept replaying that moment from the other night. Her eyes when they met his, the tremor in his hand, the whisper he'd sworn she hadn't heard. Now, watching her again, he realized he was losing. The power flickered once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the room whole. A startled gasp broke from her lips. "Oh, sorry." Maya's voice was small in the dark. "I think the storm—" "I'll check the breaker," he said, though he didn't move. His voice was closer than she expected. When her eyes adjusted, the only light came from the city below, the blurred glow of street lamps, the pulse of neon signs. The glass walls turned into mirrors, and in that reflection, she saw him standing behind her. "Sir?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly. "You don't have to call me that when it's just us." Her heart stumbled. I don't know what else to call you." He stepped closer, his reflection in the glass merging with hers. "Alexander," he said quietly. "My name is Alexander." The word hung between them, fragile, forbidden. She turned, and for the first time there was no armor in his eyes, just a man, stripped of all titles, looking at a woman as if she were the only thing left that could save him. He looked down at her, at the soft tremor in her hands, the way her breath caught every time he moved an inch closer. "You shouldn't stay so late," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "I wanted to help you finish," she murmured. "You said you needed the reports tonight. I didn't mean to keep you here." His lips curved faintly, but his eyes betrayed him. There was longing there, and fear. "You could have said no." "I don't say no to you," she said softly. Something inside him cracked. He took a step closer, and the space between them shrank until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Lightning flashed outside, spilling a silver glow over their faces. She could see every line of his jaw, the tension in his throat, the faint vulnerability he never let anyone witness. "Maya," he breathed. She swallowed hard, voice trembling. "Yes, sir. Alexander." That one word left her lips like a secret. He smiled faintly, almost disbelievingly. "You have no idea what that does to me." She blinked, unsure how to respond. The air was heavy, their breaths tangled. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. The world outside blurred until there was only this, the storm, the heartbeat between them, and the confession clawing its way out of his chest. He reached out, broad, ushing a strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered near her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin, and she shivered under his touch. "You make this place feel He paused, searching for the word. Human. Her breath caught. The cold-hearted Alexander Hale, the man who built empires and tore down competitors without blinking, looked lost, almost boyish in his honesty. Don't, she whispered, shaking her head. Please don't say things you don't mean. But he didn't step back. His hand slid down, resting gently against her neck, feeling the rapid flutter of her pulse. I've spent years convincing myself that I can't feel, that I don't need to, but you... His voice broke, soft and raw. You're undoing everything I built to survive. Her eyes glistened. You're not making sense. He laughed under his breath, low and breathless. I never do when I'm near you. She looked away, her heart racing. Alexander, people talk. They'll say I don't care, he said sharply, almost desperate. I don't care what anyone says. Her eyes met his again, searching, trembling. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because when I look at you, I don't see my secretary. I see the only person who ever looked at me without fear. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. You don't mean that. He stepped closer until there was no space left between them. His breath mingled with hers, soft and uncertain. I do. Silence pressed between them, thick with everything they had been fighting to ignore. The rain outside softened into a whisper, the world holding its breath. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said it. I love you. The words were simple, honest, terrifying. For a moment, neither moved. Maya's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked up at him, this man everyone called heartless, and saw something she never thought existed behind those steel-gray eyes. Surrender. Alexander, she breathed, her voice trembling with disbelief. He reached out, his fingertips brushing away the tear that slipped down her cheek. You don't have to say it back, he murmured. Just don't walk away. Her chest ached. She wanted to speak, to tell him how those 3 words had set her heart on fire, but her throat refused to work. Instead, she smiled faintly through her tears, eyes shining with something fragile and pure. Too late, she whispered. I already fell. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders melting away. For a brief, perfect moment, the ruthless CEO and the black secretary existed in a world untouched by titles, by fear, by the noise outside. Just 2 souls who'd finally stopped running. Maya smiled through her tears, unaware this love would soon destroy her, because at that very moment, behind the glass walls of Hale Industries, someone had been watching. The city below slept, unaware of the quiet revolution happening in the corner office of Hale Industries. The lights reflected against the glass walls like constellations caught in a private universe, and in that small world, Alexander Hale and Maya Lewis lived a story no one else would ever see. Their romance had begun in stolen moments, whispered conversations that no one else heard, laughter in the hallways when the world demanded silence. Every evening, when the last employees left and the office was wrapped in quiet, Alexander found himself seeking her presence. Sometimes it was under the pretext of reviewing documents. Other times it was merely to hear her voice, to watch her work, to watch the way her curls caught the lamplight, to smell her perfume, to feel the warmth she carried like a secret she didn't know she was sharing with him. For Maya, it was love, pure and all-consuming. She had never imagined a life so close to someone like Alexander, a man of power so absolute it could crush the world beneath his heel, yet gentle in ways that only she could see. Every word he spoke to her, every look, every subtle touch, was a whisper of devotion, and she clung to it like air. For Alexander, it was different. Love had been foreign, dangerous, a threat to the empire he had built from nothing. And yet, in her presence, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: salvation. She was the only soul who could pierce the armor he had forged from ambition and cold control. She made him feel human again, made him crave a life he had once believed he would never want. Their evenings became a dance, quiet dinners at small, secluded restaurants where no one would recognize them, midnight walks along the empty streets, hands brushing, fingers twitching against one another, words unsaid but understood, laughter replacing the long hours of silence he had once preferred. She laughed, and his chest loosened in ways he hadn't imagined possible. She smiled, and for a moment, the world outside the office, outside the empire, ceased to exist. And yet, doubt began to whisper. It started quietly at first. A comment from a colleague, a glance from a friend who didn't know her, a joke about gold diggers that lingered too long in his mind. "She's only after your money," someone had said casually over drinks. His pride bristled. Alexander Hale did not lose control, and he did not allow emotion to override judgment. Yet the seed of doubt was planted. Every time she leaned over his desk, every time she laughed at something mundane, he told himself she was clever, kind, captivating. A distraction, perhaps, but nothing more. And yet, when she looked at him, eyes shining with trust and vulnerability, he forgot the world. Every warning, every whispered concern, every thread of suspicion disappeared in her gaze. Weeks passed like this, their bond deepening in the quiet shadows. He learned her favorite coffee, the way her shoulders tensed when she was nervous, the subtle catch in her voice when she was about to laugh. She learned the slight lift of his brow when he approved of something, the tension in his jaw when he was frustrated, the way his eyes softened when he was alone with her. One evening, when the office was empty except for them, Alexander turned to her in a way that startled even him. "Maya," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you trust me?" Her heart stuttered. She had trusted him from the first day she had walked into his office, from the first time she had seen behind the mask of the ruthless CEO. "Yes," she whispered, and it was as much a plea as it was a promise. He nodded slowly, running a hand through his hair, a motion she had never seen him perform in front of anyone. "Good, because he faltered, then swallowed hard. "I can't imagine my life without you." Her eyes widened. The words fell like petals, soft and impossible, and yet they carried the weight of everything they had been. She wanted to speak, to confess, to tell him she felt the same, but he cut her off. Not with words, but with his hand, resting lightly over hers. Weeks later, under the same fluorescent lights that had once seemed cold and unforgiving, Alexander proposed. Not in a grand hall, not on a staged rooftop, but in his office, the one place where truth had finally found its voice. He knelt on one knee, the city reflected behind him, and held out a simple ring. Maya's hands trembled. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it had arrived, reality felt too bright, too overwhelming. "Yes," she said, shaking but smiling, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes, Alexander. Yes, forever." He slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her close, their foreheads touching. The world shrank to the pulse between their hearts, the breath they shared, the whispered promises that had no audience but themselves. For days, they lived in this private euphoria, small dinners, secret glances, the stolen warmth of each other's presence. Alexander's doubts, his old fears, seemed to dissolve with each laugh, each gentle touch. Maya felt the safety she had always longed for, the laissez over she had imagined only in dreams. But perfection is fragile. Late one evening, as they exchanged vows privately in the soft glow of candles in his office, a shadow passed across Alexander's eyes. For a heartbeat, the man she had fallen in love with, the gentle, vulnerable, smiling man, seemed to vanish, replaced by the ruthless, calculating figure she had glimpsed only in fleeting moments before. He whispered the words of the vow with her, lips brushing hers, heart beating against hers. But Maya felt it. The flicker of steel in his gaze, the return of the man he used to be. And though she smiled through her tears, her soul brimming with hope, she could not see what he saw. The gnawing fear, the whispering doubt, the part of him that believed love could still betray him. And in that quiet, stolen moment, as the city outside continued its endless hum, the first cracks began to form in the perfect illusion they had built together. As their hands intertwined and vows were whispered in the shadows, Maya didn't notice the hardness return to Alexander's eyes, a flicker of the man who could destroy everything they had built, and the first sign that love alone might not be enough to save them. The morning sun poured through the massive glass windows of Hale Industries, cutting through the fog of the previous night's emotions. Alexander sat at his desk, hands clasped tightly over the polished mahogany surface, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the glass. The vows they had exchanged still hung in the air like smoke, warm, intoxicating, yet tainted with a shadow he couldn't shake. He replayed every word, every smile, every brush of her hand, and felt a tension rise deep in his chest. Love had crept into him when he had sworn he would never let it, and now, even in its quiet, the ghost of his old self whispered warnings he refused to hear aloud. Maya walk. Ed in, radiant in the soft glow of the morning light, a bouquet of freshly printed reports in her hands. She smiled, trying to mask the faint tremor in her chest. Their vows had left her both elated and nervous. She had believed in this love completely, thought that for once the world could be conquered by nothing more than their devotion to each other. But something lingered in Alexander's gaze that she could not ignore, a flicker of doubt, a shadow passing across his face, fleeting yet unmistakable. "Good morning," she said softly, placing the reports on his desk. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and forced a small smile. "Morning," he replied, his voice steady, controlled, but lacking the warmth she had come to crave. She felt the distance, a chill threading through her bones, but she swallowed it, trusting that it was fleeting. "I finished the quarterly projections," she said, trying to infuse her voice with cheer. "I thought we could review them together before the board meeting." Alexander nodded, reaching for a pen but not looking at the papers. His mind wasn't on the reports. It was on the memory of her face as she had whispered yes the night before, and the flicker of steel that had returned to his eyes. He hated that part of himself, the cold, calculating side that had been honed for decades to survive in a world of cutthroat deals and unfeeling competitors. He hated that it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, even now, even in the presence of someone he loved. Maya sat across from him, her hands folded over the reports, waiting for him to begin. She noticed the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the desk. "Alexander, are you okay?" she asked tentatively. He looked up, forcing a grin. "I'm fine," he said, but the word felt hollow even to him. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess the fear that love had awakened inside him, but the pride he carried, the walls he had built, would not allow it. So he swallowed the truth, letting only a shadow of it pass in the form of a frown, a hesitation she was all too perceptive to notice. They spent the morning reviewing the reports, but their focus was fractured. Alexander found himself distracted by the curve of her smile, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle catch in her voice when she explained a figure. Each small gesture reminded him of the vulnerability he had allowed himself to feel, and of the power he still feared it held over him. By noon, Maya had finished her part, but the tension between them remained, an invisible wall neither knew how to scale. She wanted to reach for his hand, to reassure him, to anchor herself to the warmth of his presence, but she held back, fearing rejection or misunderstanding. Alexander, on the other hand, wrestled with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Desire, fear, love, suspicion, each battling for dominance in a heart that had never been tamed. The days that followed were a careful dance of closeness and restraint. Alexander would linger longer than necessary in the office, watching her work, offering subtle praise, small smiles, moments of rare vulnerability. Maya felt it too. The electricity, the pulse of something unspoken, dangerous, thrilling. They laughed softly together over minor victories, shared moments of silent understanding across desks, and sometimes, when no one else was present, their hands brushed and neither could speak. But the shadow lingered. Doubt began to creep in like a silent predator, clawing at Alexander's mind. Friends and colleagues whispered cautionary words, subtle warnings designed to protect him from heartbreak. "Remember who she is," they said. "She could be here for your fortune." The words stuck, gnawing at him when he was alone, when he was vulnerable, when he wanted to let himself trust completely. One evening, the office was empty except for them. The lights had dimmed, casting he room in muted gold. Maya walked toward him, a folder in her hands. As she stepped closer, the tension between them thickened, the air almost too heavy to breathe. Their fingers brushed while, exchanging the folder, and time seemed to pause, a heartbeat stretched into eternity. Alexander's pulse quickened, a visceral reaction he could neither deny nor control. He looked into her eyes and saw only trust, only warmth, only love, and yet the whisper of his old self, ruthless, suspicious, calculating, urged caution. He forced himself to step back, though his chest ached, though every fiber of him screamed to close the distance and never let go. "Maya," he murmured, voice low, nearly trembling, I need a moment." She looked up, eyes wide, a question on her lips, but he turned sharply, hiding the storm raging inside. He paced briefly, hands in pockets, struggling to reconcile the love he felt with the fear he could not shake. The man he had been, the one who had conquered the world without remorse, was whispering in his ear that love was a lie, that vulnerability was death. Maya stayed where she was, heart pounding, sensing the conflict, feeling the pull of his presence even as he distanced himself. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him she loved him, that nothing in the world could change the truth between them, but a hesitation held her back. She feared pushing too hard, feared awakening a side of him she did not yet understand. The tension became unbearable. Rain began to patter against the windows, a soft drumbeat echoing their unspoken emotions. Alexander closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the desk, and allowed himself a fraction of honesty. He had not spoken to anyone. "I cannot lose her, but I cannot trust completely either." Maya, sensing the turmoil, swallowed hard. The air was thick, suffocating, yet charged with undeniable connection. She stepped closer, just an inch, hoping he would meet her halfway. The electricity between them sparked again, subtle yet potent, as if the universe had conspired to hold them in this moment forever. And at the exact moment their fingers were almost touching again, the sound of the elevator chiming interrupted the fragile tension. Alexander's head snapped toward the door. In the corner of the office, a shadow appeared. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who had come at the precise instant to fracture their fragile equilibrium. The sight of the figure sent a jolt through both of them, fear and uncertainty replacing the tentative calm they had built. Alexander's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, and for the first time since their love had blossomed, the ruthless part of him returned fully. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the tension, the instinctive wariness, the silent warning that danger had arrived. She reached instinctively for Alexander, but he stepped between her and the figure, protective and wary, his hand resting lightly on her waist. Neither spoke. The air crackled with anticipation and unspoken questions. Alexander's mind raced, calculating, weighing, strategizing. Maya's chest heaved, a mixture of fear and trust intertwining in a single fragile pulse. And in that frozen moment, neither could predict what the shadow had come to do, whether it was threat, truth, or betrayal. The figure stepped fully into the light, and Alexander froze. His eyes widened as he whispered under his breath, "No, it can't be." Maya's hand trembled on his chest, and the office seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was about to fall. The shadow in the doorway froze them both, its presence a sudden, cold weight pressing on the fragile bubble they had built around themselves. Alexander's hand remained lightly on Maya's waist, protective yet tense, his mind racing through every possible scenario. His eyes narrowed, scanning the figure, trying to recognize threat or truth, trying to reconcile the fear that had gripped him with the hope that had once filled him entirely. Maya felt her chest tighten, a cold dread threading through her heartbeat. The warmth of Alexander at her side was no longer comforting. It was a reminder that even the strongest love could be tested, that even the most unshakable trust could shatter in an instant. She glanced at him, hoping for a clue, a hint, anything to ground her in the moment, but his gaze was locked on the intruder, unreadable and fierce. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing the face that neither of them expected. Alexander's breath hitched, his pulse skipped, and in that instant, the illusion of safety, the fragile trust, the private world they had created, all collapsed like glass under a hammer. "Maya," the voice said, unfamiliar yet intimate enough to twist the knife of disbelief. Alexander's jaw tightened, and his hand on her waist tensed involuntarily, a silent warning that danger had arrived in a form neither of them could ignore. Maya's fingers curled into his sleeve instinctively. She felt his heart hammering beneath her touch, a frantic rhythm that mirrored her own. She looked up at him, eyes wide and trembling. "Alexander, who is this?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, analyzing, calculating, strategizing. But the sudden drop in his chest, the twist of jealousy, the flicker of something far darker than suspicion, had him momentarily speechless. For a man who controlled the world around him, this intrusion felt like betrayal before any word had been spoken. The figure advanced, and in a quiet, venom-laced tone, spoke. "I think it's time you both knew the truth." Maya's heart stuttered. The words held a weight that was both threatening and intimate, a combination that left her breathless. She glanced at Alexander, whose entire demeanor had changed. The calm, controlled man who had whispered his love to her, who had made her feel untouchable, now looked ready to explode with anger, fear, and doubt all at once. "What truth?" Alexander demanded, his voice low, dangerous, each word clipped and precise. His hands, though lightly resting on Maya, were rigid with the need to protect, to control, to confront whatever threat had come into their sanctuary. The intruder's eyes flicked toward Maya, a hint of malice flashing there. "The truth about you, about her, about the choices she's made while you were busy loving her." Maya's hands went to her mouth instinctively. What are you talking about?" she whispered, voice trembling. Panic clawed at her, searing her chest. She felt Alexander stiffen beside her, the tension radiating off him in waves, a silent promise that he would not let her face this alone. The shadow moved closer, deliberately, savoring the reaction it had provoked. "Do you really think everything she told you was true? Every smile, every word, every confession of love? Or were you just the perfect mark?" Alexander's eyes narrowed dangerously. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound she had never heard before. Maya's pulse raced, both terrified and transfixed by the intensity radiating from him. His fingers tightened on her waist, the strength in his grip grounding her even as the words tried to tear her world apart. Maya tried to speak, tried to defend herself, tried to reassure him. "Alexander, please, it's not true. The figure interrupted, stepping into the center of the office, tall, imposing, and deliberate in every movement. "The reports you've seen, the late nights, the smiles, all part of a game. She's playing you, Hale. You're blind, in love, and she's laughing behind your back." Alexander's chest heaved. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and control, faltered under the weight of disbelief. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed that this could not be true. But the shadow's words planted seeds of doubt, corrosion slowly spreading into the trust he had built. Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. She looked up at him, desperate. "Alexander, don't listen to him. I've never lied to you. I love you." Her voice cracked with emotion, the raw honesty of her plea hanging in the air like fragile glass. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The man had shaken the foundation of his world in a single sentence, and Alexander felt something he had never felt before: vulnerability. The ruthless millionaire, the man who commanded empires and never faltered, was suddenly unsure of the one person he had sworn to trust with everything. The intruder smiled, sensing the chaos he had wrought. "Do you really think she could love someone like you? Or is it just the money, Hale? The power? The prestige? She's been perfect. Too perfect. From the start." Maya's hands trembled, reaching for Alexander's, trying to anchor him, trying to hold him in reality. "Please, Alexander. Believe me. Please, I swear." He turned to face her, eyes dark, stormy, conflicted. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought he might not believe her. He took a step back, his mind a battlefield of love, rage, and suspicion. You expect me to just take your word?" he whispered, voice low and shaking, the shadows in his eyes making him almost unrecognizable to her. "After what I just heard? After everything?" Maya's throat tightened. Her tears fell freely now. "Alexander, I've never lied to you. You have to know that. I would never." The intruder stepped forward again, closing the space, forcing tension between the three of them. "She lied. She hid things from you. And now you'll find out exactly what she's capable of. There's no going back." Alexander's chest heaved. He looked at Maya, and in that moment, love and doubt collided like storms at sea. Every nerve in his body screamed to protect her, to trust her, yet a small, gnawing seed of betrayal had taken root. Maya tried to reach him, tried to plead, tried to remind him of all they had built together, but he pulled slightly away, not out of anger, but out of confusion and fear, the first real crack in the armor of his heart. The shadow's smile widened, sensing the fracture. "Hale, she's not the woman you think she is, and soon you'll have proof." The room felt impossibly heavy. Rain streaked the glass, lightning flashed, and the city outside seemed unaware of the emotional tempest inside that small office. Alexander's hands shook ever so slightly, and Maya's breath caught. The love they had fought so hard for now hung by the thinnest thread, threatened by lies, deception, and doubt. For a moment, all three stood frozen. Time had slowed to a heartbeat. Every second felt like an eternity. The air crackled with tension, love, betrayal, and fear, and neither Alexander nor Maya knew who to trust, except each other, though even that certainty had been challenged by the shadow in the room. Suddenly, the intruder pulled out a folder, tossing it onto Alexander's desk with a smirk. Alexander's eyes widened as he lifted the top sheet, and the words scrawled across it shattered the world he thought he knew. "The truth about your wife and the child." The folder landed on Alexander's desk like a hammer. The papers slid slightly before stopping, and the world around him seemed to tilt, unsteady, unreal. He stared at the top sheet, eyes scanning the words, every line punching through him like a physical blow. His chest tightened, his hands shook, and for the first time in years, the ruthless, unyielding Alexander Hale felt the cold sting of vulnerability. Pure, unfiltered, terrifying. Maya stood frozen beside him, eyes wide, breath caught in her chest. She could see the shift in his demeanor, the familiar warmth, trust, and love, now shadowed by confusion and disbelief. He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw the man who had once whispered, "I love you," dissolve into someone she no longer recognized. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His gaze flickered between her and the folder, every instinct in his body screaming that something was wrong, that the woman he had built a life around was somehow hiding a secret too dangerous to ignore. Maya's voice trembled as she stepped closer. "Alexander, please, you have to believe me. I've never lied to you. Everything you think you know. It's not true. But he held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. His eyes were stormy, the shadows of doubt now fully eclipsing the light that had existed between them. I don't know if I can, he whispered, the words barely audible. You have to understand. This is serious. Maya's hands shook, reaching instinctively for his. Then let me explain. Let me show you. He stepped back. The distance between them suddenly felt like a chasm, wide and insurmountable. I can't, Maya, he said finally, voice tight with suppressed anger and heartbreak. I trusted you. I gave you everything. And now? He gestured toward the folder. I don't even know who you are. Tears blurred her vision. Alexander, this is a mistake. Please, listen to me. I love you. I've always loved you. But his face was unreadable, hardened, distant. His mind replayed the intruder's words, the accusation of deception, the suggestion that she had used him, manipulated him, that nothing had been real. The folder itself was a weapon, a perfect tool to shatter the fragile trust they had fought to build. In the coming hours, Alexander made a decision that shocked even him. The love in his chest warred violently against the rage, suspicion, and pride that now ruled. He picked up the pen from his desk and slid the divorce papers toward her. Maya's breath hitched, a scream caught in her throat. Sign them, he said, voice low but commanding. I can't trust you anymore. Not now. Not after what I just saw. Maya's world crumbled. Her hands shook violently as she reached for the papers, tears falling freely now. Alexander, please, no, you don't understand. But he wouldn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the city skyline outside, the light of the morning reflecting in his eyes like shards of ice. The man she had the man who had held her heart with reverence and warmth, was gone. In his place stood the Alexander Hale she barely recognized, distant, cold, calculating, unable to see the truth of her heart. With trembling hands, she signed. The pen scratched across the paper, each stroke a dagger to her soul. When she finished, she looked up, hoping against hope that he would reach for her, that he would tell her it was a mistake. But he didn't. He simply nodded once, stiffly, and turned back to the window. Maya dropped to her knees, sobbing, hands gripping the edge of his desk. Alexander, I love you. This is your child. It's yours. Please, please don't do this. He didn't respond. His silence was deafening, a wall she could not breach. She felt her heart shatter, the life they had imagined together crumbling into dust. In a swirl of grief and despair, she gathered herself, her dignity, and fled the office. The city outside seemed indifferent, uncaring, as she disappeared into the morning light. Her life as Maya Lewis, the woman who had given everything for love, had ended that day in the office of Hale Industries. Months passed. Maya rebuilt herself from the ashes, her heartbreak fueling her determination. She became a force, a woman who no longer needed the approval of anyone, not Alexander, not the intruder, not the world. She rose as a business tycoon, her name whispered with respect and awe across the city. Every success was a silent testament to the love she had lost and the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her. Alexander, meanwhile, tried to bury the pain. He threw himself into work, empire building, and control, but the ghost of Maya lingered in every quiet corner, every late night, every reflection in the glass walls of his office. Doubt, regret, and longing gnawed at him in ways no empire, no power, no fortune could ever quell. And then, 6 years late, fate delivered a shock that neither of them could have foreseen. Maya arranged a high-profile business meeting, unaware that the man who had once been her world would walk into the room, unaware that the past would slam into the present with a force strong enough to tear the floor from beneath them both. Alexander froze as he recognized her. Not the broken, frightened woman who had fled his life, but the radiant, confident, commanding woman who now dominated the room. She was more beautiful than ever, her presence magnetic, her power undeniable. The sight of her stirred every memory, every feeling he had tried to bury, and it hit him harder than any betrayal or doubt ever had. He moved closer, heart hammering, breath catching, and then his eyes fell to something he never expected, a small child standing confidently beside her, a mirror image of himself in every detail. Shock froze him, tears threatening to spill. His knees buckled, and for the first time in years, the ruthless millionaire fell to his knees, his heart in shreds, and whispered the words that had haunted him for 6 long years. My child. Maya looked down at him, heart pounding, eyes blazing with both anger and something that had never faded. Love. Alexander, she said slowly, deliberately, now you see, this is all yours. But do you deserve a second chance? Alexander's knees pressed into the polished floor, cold seeping through his expensive shoes, yet he hardly noticed. All he could see was the child, the tiny figure with the same stormy eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same unmistakable curve of his own mouth. His heart thudded painfully, the years of separation, pride, and doubt hitting him all at once like a tidal wave. The world around him, the meeting, the lights, the murmuring attendees, faded into background noise. All that existed was her, Maya, standing before him, more magnificent and commanding than he remembered, and the living proof of their love. Maya's eyes were sharp, calculating, yet trembling with emotion. The years had hardened her in some ways, but he core of her heart, the part that had loved Alexander fiercely, still pulsed beneath her control. You've waited 6 years, she said, voice steady, almost cruel in its calmness. And now you see what you lost. Do you understand what your doubt cost you? Alexander's chest heaved, breath coming in shallow gasps. I was a fool, he whispered, voice cracking with a mixture of guilt and relief. I never should have let you go. Never. Not for a second. Maya's jaw tightened, the pain of their past cutting through every word. And yet you did, she said softly, bending slightly so that the child could step closer to her. Do you think it's that simple? That 6 years of my life, my struggles, my victories, can be undone by words? Alexander swallowed hard, reaching slowly toward her. No, but I will spend the rest of my life making it right. I swear it. I will prove to you, to him, to the world, that I never stopped loving you. Her eyes softened slightly at the sight of him kneeling before their child, tears glistening but unashamed. The child reached for Alexander instinctively, and Alexander's hands trembled as he lifted the little figure into his arms, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. The resemblance was uncanny, a perfect echo of his own features. He could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of life in his arms, a living testament to what he had lost. Maya watched quietly, her own tears threatening to fall. She wanted to run to him, to embrace him, but fear held her back. Fear that this moment might be fleeting. Fear that the man who had once condemned her to heartbreak could still betray her again. Yet she couldn't deny the flicker of hope, the tiny spark igniting in her chest that whispered, maybe, just maybe, he had changed. Alexander turned his gaze toward her, eyes dark and stormy, full of remorse and passion. Maya, he said, voice raw, almost unrecognizable. I was blind. I let my pride, my fears, my own demons destroy the best thing I've ever had. I don't deserve you, and I know that. But I will fight every second, every day, to earn your forgiveness. And if I fail, I will live with the regret of losing you forever. Her hands trembled, gripping the edge of the child's small shoulders. Alexander, 6 years, you left me with nothing but pain, questions, and memories of what could have been. And yet, seeing you like this, seeing him, she trailed off, emotions choking her words. He stepped closer, careful not to rush her, letting the air between them simmer with unspoken tension. "Let me start," he said quietly. "Let me prove that I'm here, that I've changed, that nothing will ever come between us again. I will never leave you. I swear it." The child giggled softly, resting a tiny hand on Alexander's cheek. The gesture broke something deep inside him, a dam of grief and longing collapsing into pure emotion. He laughed shakily, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're perfect," he whispered. "Both of you. Perfect." Maya's heart ached at the sight, torn between fury at the past and the undeniable truth of her lingering love. She could see the man who had hurt her transformed, softened, broken open by the weight of what he had lost. And still, caution held her close, a shield forged over years of struggle. Alexander knelt before her and their child, clasping both of their hands tightly in his. "Maya, I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't expect you to forget the pain I caused, but I am here now, and I will be here for every single moment of your life and his. I promise you, I will never let doubt rule again. Only love, only truth, only us." The room was silent except for the soft murmurs of the city beyond the glass. Maya's tears fell freely now, unashamed, as years of fear, doubt, and heartbreak collided with the undeniable truth in front of her. The man who had left her, who had doubted her, who had condemned their love, was now here, kneeling, vulnerable, confessing, begging for the chance to make everything right. Her chest tightened. She wanted to run into his arms, to feel the safety she had once known. She wanted to scream at him for the pain he had caused. She wanted to collapse in tears and laughter, anger and joy intertwined. And yet, she hesitated, the final test of trust, the last wall standing between the past and the future. Alexander noticed her hesitation, sensing the fragile tension. He lifted their child slightly, holding him up so that Maya could see him clearly. "Look at him," Alexander said softly, voice trembling with awe and emotion. "This is our love, this is our life, and I will never let it slip away again." For a long moment, Maya stared at their child, at Alexander, at the proof of what had once been and could now be again. The storm of years, betrayal, and heartbreak had brought them to this precipice, and the world seemed to pause, waiting for her decision. Finally, she stepped forward, reaching for Alexander's hand. Her fingers brushed his, tentative, trembling, yet deliberate. She felt the warmth of him, the pulse of his heart, and something inside her shifted. The first bridge had been crossed. The first crack in the wall of her guarded heart appeared. And then, from the doorway, a soft but deliberate sound interrupted the fragile moment. The same intruder who had caused so much chaos 6 years ago had returned. Alexander and Maya froze, eyes locking in silent alarm. The intruder's expression was unreadable, but the presence alone was a threat to everything they had just begun to rebuild. The intruder stepped fully into the light, and Maya's eyes widened in shock. "You again?" she whispered. Alexander's hands tightened around their child. "What do you want this time?" The intruder smiled coldly, and in a voice that dripped menace, said, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." City lights reflected off the glass walls of Hale Industries, shimmering like distant stars. Alexander held their child close, the tiny fingers clutching his shirt, grounding him in a reality he had once feared he'd lost forever. Maya stood a step behind, eyes soft but cautious, heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The intruder from before loomed near the doorway, but Alexander's focus was unwavering, on Maya, on the child, on the life they had the chance to reclaim. "Leave us," Alexander said, voice low, dangerous, but steady. Every inch of him radiated authority, the ruthless energy that had built empires now focused entirely on protecting what mattered most. The intruder hesitated, lips curling into a sly smile. "It's not that simple, Hale. You think you can just take back what's yours?" Alexander's hand tightened around their child. "Try me. His tone was cold, final. The intruder's eyes flicked to Maya, then back to Alexander, assessing, calculating, perhaps realizing that this time the game was over. With a deliberate step back, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving the room heavy with tension but empty of threat. The moment the door clicked shut, Alexander exhaled a long, shuddering breath, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Maya stepped closer, her eyes brimming with tears. Alexander, we survived it, she whispered. All of it. The lies, the pain, the years apart. We're still here. Alexander looked down at their child, then back at her. The sight of Maya, strong, radiant, yet vulnerable, made his chest ache with a depth of love he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. We are, he said softly, because I never stopped loving you. Even when I doubted, even when I hurt you, I never stopped. Maya's lips trembled as she reached for him, hands resting gently on his cheeks. And I never stopped loving you either, she said, voice breaking with emotion. Even when you abandoned me in your heart, even when I had to fight alone, I loved you. I love you. And I forgive you, Alexander. The words struck him like lightning, igniting meaning deep and powerful. He leaned closer, forehead pressing against hers, closing the space between them. Their breaths mingled, shaky, warm, intimate, a delicate dance of hearts reconnecting after years of pain. Maya, he whispered, voice raw, trembling, I promise, I will never hurt you again, never doubt you again. I will spend every moment making it up to you. Her hands slid around his neck, pulling him closer. And I'll be here, she said, her voice steady with newfound strength. We'll face everything together. No more secrets, no more lies, just us. He closed the gap, lips capturing hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, and full of everything they had missed. Years of longing, regret, and desire poured into that moment. The city around them ceased to exist. The only world that mattered was the one they were rebuilding together, one heartbeat, one breath, one touch at a time. Their child giggled softly, clapping tiny hands as Alexander lifted him, twirling gently. You're going to have two parents who love you fiercely, Alexander murmured, eyes shining with tears. And I swear, I will never let anything come between us again. Maya laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, wrapping her arms around Alexander from behind, resting her cheek against his back. The warmth of their embrace, the steady pulse of his heart beneath her hand, the laughter of their child. It all felt like home, a life reclaimed from the wreckage of the past. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Alexander and Maya rebuilt their lives, their love deepening with each shared moment, each whispered confession, each tender touch. The past was not forgotten. They honored it, learned from it, and let it strengthen their bond rather than weaken it. Alexander became not just a powerful CEO, but a devoted husband and father, a man transformed by love and forgiveness. Maya continued to thrive in her career, a tycoon with both compassion and fire, supported and loved by the man who had once doubted her, but now stood unwaveringly by her side. One evening, as they sat together in the city, penthouse overlooking the city, Alexander took Maya's hand in his. Their child sat between them, sleepy but content, tiny fingers entwined with theirs. Maya, he said softly, eyes dark with emotion, thank you for everything, for loving me when I didn't deserve it, for staying true, for giving us this chance. Maya smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. It wasn't just me, she said, voice gentle. It was us, and now we have forever. Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple, then whispered into her hair, forever. The city lights glittered around them like stars, silent witnesses to a love that had survived lies, betrayal, separation, and time. And in that moment, nothing existed but the three of them, a family forged by heartbreak, strengthened by resilience, and bound by an unbreakable love. They had lost, they had struggled, they had doubted, but in the end, love had triumphed. And this time, Alexander knew it would last forever. As they watched the city from the penthouse, their child giggled and pointed toward the skyline. Alexander followed his gaze and noticed a shadow moving across the rooftop of a distant building. He instinctively moved in front of Maya, protective once more, but she only smiled softly. "Some things," she whispered, "don't matter anymore. Not when we have each other." Alexander looked down at their child, then at Maya, and nodded. The past had tested them, but nothing could ever break the bond they had now. Their second chance at love, stronger than ever.